to start with, I'd like you to have a look at this picture and think, well, what can you see? Then what do you know? What have we learned in geography? What can you apply to this? And finally, what can you infer? So what could you perhaps explain about how this has been created? So have a think about those 3 questions. So what can you see? Well, this is a bend in the river. It's called a meander. What do we know? Well, this has been made by those fluvial, those river processes such as erosion and deposition. What can we infer? Well, we can infer that it's that erosion, that's deposition, that's causing this landform to happen, that's causing it to change over time. So that's what we're going to work on today. We are going to look at meanders and what a meander can turn into over time, which is an oxbow lake. So we're just going to look at the role that erosion and deposition play in actually changing that bend, changing that meander in the river. We are currently down here looking at our erosional and depositional landforms, our meanders and our oxbow lakes. So we'll start with our meander. I'd like to draw a diagram, just a simple diagram like what I've got here, and on it you're going to, you can highlight in different colours, or you can just write on about where the erosion and where the deposition will take place. We also need to explain what a meander actually is, where the erosion and deposition occur, why do they occur there, and also how might this change over time. So we know your meander, it's just your bend in the river. They occur because of the flow of the river. Where the river is flowing fastest, it causes erosion. Where the river is flowing slowest, it causes deposition, because the river's not carrying, it's not got enough energy to carry the sediment to actually wear away the bed and the banks. So on the outside of the meander, that's where your erosion takes place. And to understand this, you need to think of, if you've ever been on say a water slide, as you go down the water slide, if you go around a corner, you get sent out to the edge, you get flung out sideways, because that's where the water is flowing the fastest. If you went down the middle or the inside of the bend, you'd stop moving. It's because the water's not flowing fastest. It's exactly the same in a meander. The fastest flow of the water goes around the outside, and because it's faster, it's got more energy, so it's in this area here where you get your erosion. Meanwhile, on the inside of the bend, that's where the water is flowing slowest, so you get your deposition, you get your sediment that gets dropped. So that's why erosion occurs on the outside. Fastest flow, more energy, more erosion. Inside of the bend, slowest flow, less energy, deposition. And that type of erosion, where it occurs outwards, that's our lateral erosion. So make sure you've drawn your diagram, that you've marked on where your erosion, where your deposition will take place, what your meander is, and why erosion and deposition occur where they do. And how might this change over time? Well, the way your meander changes, actually those bends, they start to become bigger. So your meander becomes bigger, more winding, until eventually the meander will cut all the way through and it will form an oxbow lake, and we'll come back to that later. So this is a different type of diagram. This is a cross section through the river. So this was looking downwards, a bird's eye view. This one is taking a slice through. So imagine we've taken a slice through this part of the river and we've turned it on its side, and that's what you get. So a bit of a more complicated diagram, but you can definitely have a go at doing it. Draw it in pencil, get those labels on there. And what you can see is, you can see that on the outside of the river, where the flow is fastest, your erosion takes place. But actually your meander on the outside, that's where the water is deeper, where the river's deeper. And because the river's deeper, it means there's less friction, there's less water in contact with the bed and the banks, and that means the water can flow faster because there's less friction. And as it erodes here, it actually creates quite a steep part of the bank, and we call that a river cliff, because it's a steep section caused by that lateral, that side-to-side erosion. And on the inside, where the flow is slow, you get your deposition, and that causes a slip-off slope, sometimes called a river beach on that inside edge. So you can have a go at drawing this diagram, and then want you to complete this paragraph. And you're going to complete this paragraph by using these key terms. So a meander is formed in the, select the appropriate words. It is formed when something occurs on the something, creating a something. This is because something occurs on the something, creating a something. This is because. You just need to fill in the blanks. The thalweg, that's just a word that we can use where the river is deepest and the flow is the fastest. So complete that paragraph. When you're ready, press play and I'll give you the answer. So your meander is formed in the middle and lower course of the river. It is formed when erosion occurs on the outside of the bend, creating a river cliff. This is because the flow of the river is fastest, causing lateral erosion. Deposition occurs on the inside of the bend, creating a river beach. This is because the flow of the river is slowest, allowing the deposition to happen. We're now going to look at what that meander turns into. So it turns into an oxbow lake. And all it is, it's a horseshoe-shaped lake here that used to be a meander of the river, but it's been completely cut off. So I'd like to have a go at drawing this sequence of 4 diagrams, just showing how that meander starts to bend more, meander more, until eventually the river cuts all the way through and that bend gets cut off, creating your oxbow lake. So on those diagrams, you're going to highlight the areas of erosion and the areas of deposition. You can use 2 different colours. I then want you to have a go at adding these labels to explain how it forms. So I'll talk you through step by step, and you can add the labels around the outside. Some of them might occur more than one place. So what happens is your river meanders, you get erosion on the outside of the bend and you get deposition on the inside of the bend. Over time, that causes the bigger bend, and it causes this section here, the neck of the meander, to get narrower until eventually the river will cut all the way through the neck of the meander. Usually that happens when you have something like a flood, something that causes an extra increase of the amount of water, extra energy in that river. Once the river is cut through the neck of the meander, well, there's no point in that water flowing all the way around the outside, is there? If you need to get from one place to another, you're not going to go the long way around. You're going to go the short way, aren't you? And the river does exactly the same. So it carries on with this straight path and it leaves this cut off, this oxbow lake at the side, and eventually that will just fill in completely. It'll disappear. But what's clever about these is eventually you'll just get another meander forming, and these meanders will slowly bend and wind and move across your floodplain and create large, flat areas either side of the river. So make sure you've got those labels added to your diagrams. On the next slide, I'll show you the answers to where they belong. So your areas of erosion are these areas in red, and your areas of deposition are these areas in green. And you can see the outside of the bend worn away by erosion. The neck of the meander gets narrower. The meander becomes bigger. That would belong there. You get your deposition building up on the inside of the bends. Eventually, your river cuts through the neck of the meander. Your meander is cut off from the main river, and your oxbow lake is formed. You can add your slowest and your fastest currents. Remember, slowest current on the inside of the bend, fastest current on the outside of the bend. So now you can have a go at your assessed piece and I'd like to answer this exam question. Explain how river meanders may change over time. It's a 4-mark question, so that means 2 of the marks are for your knowledge, your AO1, and 2 of those marks are for your AO2, your understanding, your ability to explain. So how I'd like to do this, have a go at using those key terms I've put on there: meander, erosion, deposition, velocity, meander neck. Make a point, explain it by using your triggers as a result, leading to, this means that, because, and say what firstly happens and why. What then happens and why. But this question is not asking how meanders formed, it's asking you to explain how river meanders may change over time. So it's only 4 marks, you don't need to write an essay. 2 developed sentences should get you full marks. So I'd like to answer that question as a comment on Show My Homework for me, please. And I will mark it and I'll leave you a comment and I'll give you an area to improve. And next lesson, I'll give you a model answer and you can use that to actually improve what you've written about this. So just to recap what we've been doing so far, I'm going to give you a list of words. I just want you to write down what it means. And once you've written them all down, I'll give you the answers. So hydraulic action, abrasion, suspension, traction, deposition, and gorge. So write down what they mean, and I'll give the answers in a second. So hydraulic action, that's a type of erosion where the force of the water pushes into cracks, air gets trapped, that causes the crack to break apart, causing erosion. Abrasion, that's a sandpaper type action, so another type of erosion where rocks and pebbles rub against a rock, causing bits to break off. Suspension, that's how your smaller particles, things like sand silt, very light, very small, how they're carried, how they're transported within the river. And suspension means they're held up like a suspension bridge. So they're carried in suspension, they're held up and moved along by the river. Traction, that's how some of your bigger boulders, rocks move. They're too heavy to be picked up, so they're rolled along the bottom of the river, I think like a tractor wheel, because that's large and that rolls. So that's another form of transportation. Deposition, well, that's when sediment is dropped, anything from rock, silt, sand, and they're dropped because the river, the water, doesn't have enough energy to keep moving them. And finally, a gorge, that's the landform created when a waterfall retreats upstream, leaving behind a steep-sided valley. So make sure you've answered that exam question for me, please, as a comment showing my homework. Next lesson, we'll be looking at depositional landforms. Take care. Bye-bye.